Okay, good afternoon. Let's get started. Any software engineers in the room? Anyone? Okay. Anybody using AI to code? Okay, seems like all of you. Okay, then maybe this will be familiar to you, this meme. You used AI to generate 10,000 lines of code. Great. But then you spent maybe 2 days to debug. Sounds that familiar to you? Anyone? Happened to you? Yeah? Okay, let's see what we can do about this. There's a new term coming up, quite popular right now, vibe coding. Maybe that's something you're not into, and I will understand. And so this is also related today, comparing vibe coding versus what you did in the past maybe. And I use a lot of memes you will see. So this is another example. Maybe you use ChatGPT to copy your code over and then copy it back. This is one way to do it, but there's also better ways. And maybe you are at this level of this person to vibe code a whole video game with one prompt, right? Maybe some of you have been able to do that. But maybe you can get there, not a video game, but maybe something else, something relevant for you. So let's find out today, how can you teach your LLM to code like you? And I mean like you, like exactly, not like a robot, but like you. And I'll make it short. I think after this slide, the talk can be already over. It's very simple. You need documentation. So documentation is the solution. And you need some sort of pointers, some sort of routing to help your LLM to understand what you're trying to do. And one of the solutions you might want to use is Hubql Grid. So let's go to the next step, quick introduction. My name is Tobias, co-founder at Hubql. And we experiment with dev tooling about building with AI and also documentation. And I like memes, you will see, and computers, and I like to help tech teams and been using programming for a long time. Let's start with the theory about LLMs. In theory, what is LLMs and what is the problem with LLMs? One of them is lack of context, so they don't really understand what you're trying to do. They will have to understand what you actually want to do, and they might give you incorrect suggestions. And what is the reason? It's because they don't have the context, the fully understanding of what you're trying to do. And the second one is missing documentation. Code without context is irrelevant. So it's very hard to debug, it's hard to modify, it's hard to scale. If you do bigger projects, it's very relevant that you have documentation, not only for humans, but also for LLMs. Now, how does the reality look like? Well, normally like this. So you generated something, and then what's next? What you're going to do with it? You might be a little lost, right? Like you get a bunch of code, what you're going to do. And I think this is a bit too small, but this is a code editor. I use Cursor in this case just as an example. And my prompt is build a to-do app. Okay, everybody did that in the past. And what you're going to get is something like this. I hope you can see this. What you normally get is something like a React app. You get a React app where you have some sort of state that will add a to-do, delete a to-do, maybe something like that. Very basic, but it's not really production ready, right? So what can you do to improve it? First of all, you can improve your prompt. And I think that's too small again, but in this case, I used the prompt to describe the tech stack I want to use. So I said, I want to build a React app with Supabase and Elysia and build me a full stack app connecting to a REST API to fetch the data. That as an example. As a result, you get already a better result because maybe you have a certain preference in terms of tech stack or technologies you want to use. So this is your next step. You can already improve the output with just a bit more context that you give to LLMs. But reality is where LLMs right now, probably somewhere in the middle, mostly in terms of coding. But I think all of you in the room are like on the right-hand side, right? Like you're probably smarter than an LLM in terms of coding and your experience. So take it as an advantage to be more successful. So what can you do? This is what I just described. Take a bit more time when you're prompting. So take more time to describe what you actually do in your head when you code, right? You think a lot about tech stack, your preferences, kind of approach that you want to take. So do that when you code with AI as well. Take more time into crafting a description of what you want to do. And the result is normally better. You will end up with something that is maybe more useful, something that helps you to save time, maybe that helps you to actually generate something useful that you can then use as a template and go to the next step. And so it's really valuable that you spend this time on documentation or prompting. So this is just an example. You get maybe something better, something more split up into files, the naming is better, things like that. So back to the idea of documentation. How can documentation help you? Okay, we saw the theory and what is the status. But how can you actually use documentation to do that? Reality, again, about documentation is something like this. You enter maybe a new company. The reality is there's no documentation whatsoever. Or another reality is something like this. You get documentation that looks like that, where, yeah, maybe there is documentation, but it's maybe not actually correct or outdated. So that also leads to incorrect results, right? It's the wrong pointer. And so something that you have to fix. And how to teach LLMs, I try to break it down into maybe like 3 steps that you can take to maybe have a better approach in teaching LLMs. So one of them, you have to plan. Same when you do coding, you also plan together with the LLM. You need a project summary. You have to pick a tech stack, like a preference that you have, and you have to define boundaries, something do's or don'ts. You have to tell it to the LLM so they will understand. And also, if that's something you care about, coding guidelines, something that you want to inject into the output, it's also relevant for you, put it in the plan. The next one is about context. Link documentation. You can't expect a LLM or someone that is new to your project to understand your project or documentation. You have to link it. So all of the coding tools offer you the chance to actually link documentation, and you can index it, and then it will be relevant and give you better outputs. Another way is to describe your repository structure if you have existing repositories, and point the LLM to code examples. This is the most powerful that you can do, because LLMs based on templates, based on examples. But if you already have examples in your project, just use them and it will kind of use them as an example. That's why autocomplete works very well with LLMs, for example. And the last one is you need a feedback loop. You can't expect to like use LLM and then not improve it afterwards. You have to track the changes that you do. So you can ask the LLM to actually keep track of the changes, keep a change log, and use that to continuously improve. Otherwise, it will always be bad. So have a feedback loop inside your prompting as well, and keep track of the changes. So before it looks maybe like this, you don't have any documentation, right? So what you can do is something like that. I hope this is big enough to read. This is one example. I also have a repository for you to see. In Cursor, for example, you have Cursor rules. You can use Cursor rules to describe your project. And what you can do is go step by step through the topics that I just mentioned. So one of them is you describe your project overall. What is your project about? You describe your project in terms of tech stack, your expectations. So one of the examples is, how do you like to code? What is your coding style? Are you more minimal? Are you a functional programmer? Do you like classes? Things like that. You can describe it. You can also use roles. They're sometimes useful for LLMs to understand like the context as well to get started. So you can describe the role, like the person that you are. And as a next step, you can also, do examples like this. What you want to focus on? What is your focus as an engineer? So you can describe this. It might help you with the output. Another one is also you can use tags. Some people use XML or JSON to provide more relevant instructions. So instead of just markdown or plain text, try to use some sort of structure in your prompts. They will help you to structure the output and overall help the LLM to produce better results. The same goes for coding style. Maybe you care about naming, right? This can also break linters a lot. So if you have CI/CD in your company, and they are relevant about file naming and variable names. If you have LLM with 10,000 lines of code and all of the naming is wrong, this is a nightmare. So try to inject this as well. Care about your coding style, inject it in the prompt. The same for tech stack. Maybe you have preference for libraries. Also describe this, like describe the libraries that you use, because LLMs have a preference for certain libraries. React, Next.js, Tailwind, things like that might be a preference for LLMs, but maybe use something else. So describe that as well. And this is one example also for cursor rules. Cursor rules now supports pointers. I call them pointers, but actually it's just you can include or direct LLMs to another file that is relevant. In this case, this would be example files. So those are your templates. If you ever write a CRUD app, normally CRUD apps are repeating themselves, right? You have a new model, which is almost doing the same thing, except the business logic. So what you can do is you can point it to your example, and this acts as your template to code. And you can point the LLM using cursor rules, continue rules, or any other rules that you have for your editor to do that, exactly that. And yeah, what is the output? You normally get something better. This is just an example. I did just one file to describe a bit more on what it should do, and the result was much better, definitely better than before. It's split up into libraries, it builds separate modules that use the coding structure I expected from my examples. And this is what you can also expect if you spend some time on documentation. And now, introducing also Hubql Grid. Hubql Grid is our project at Hubql, which is going to be open source. And the plan is to act as a code editor for documentation. What we're going to do is auto-merge documentation from different sources and produce documentation that is relevant for the code editor that you use. The way it's going to work is like this. We're going to have a document editor that you can use to maintain your documentation. We will have a CLI that's watching to your markdown files or whatever is your input in terms of documentation, and then produce different rules for your editors that you use, because company is normally made up of different editors that you may use. Everyone has a preference. So we're going to produce the output for multiple sources to help you in your team to have relevant documentation depending on what the code editor that you use. This is available under Hubql/Hubql on GitHub. It's still under development, but if you're interested, please come talk to me. Happy to chat and talk about this. And yeah. Now, summary again. How can you code with LLMs to code like you? First of all, you can also use LLMs to generate documentation. You don't have to write it, you can also generate it. So you can ask, let's say, Cursor, write me a cursor rule for my current project, and we're actually going to do that, and then you can refine it. So you don't have to write pages of documentation. Again, you need code examples that help you with the kind of structure and templates that you have. An important one, I think, is test coverage. So maybe there's some sort of comeback as well for test-driven development. I think it's very useful if you have text coverage. It will help you to ensure that anything that you add will also still work, even if you generate a lot. And so hopefully we go from this, being Harold, 22 years old like this, and we're going to be like this, right? Vibe coding, everybody going to be vibe coding and happy, and we're not aged that much as a developer. So try to use this, it might help you. And if you use Cursor or interested in this topic, please come talk to me, happy to chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Actually, the next class at 4:50. So we still have a bit of buffer. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to go to the next talk if you are going for another session.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, that was great. That's interesting. Have you ever deployed a production-grade application using this strategy?
I would say it works very well with greenfield projects, right? It does work with production-ready apps, but if you only go by feature, okay? So if you use, let's say, Cursor, you are able to build certain features if you scope them. So you have to experiment with your code base to kind of get a feel on how far you can go with the feature. Like, let's say you're changing some of the styling in the app. I think that's quite easy to do. Let's say you add a new CRUD endpoint. Very likely you get maybe 90% of the code is quite good. But then it depends on the code base, how large it is, right? So you might run into issues where the routing doesn't really work, and then the context will be messed up because it will look at the wrong place and copy over examples or templates from the wrong part of the repository. So I think, yeah, the answer is it depends, right? Depends on the size of your project, but also on your prompting. Like, how small do you go with the feature that you're building? And I think you have to experiment with that. Yeah.
Thank you, great session. I just wanted to confirm about the product. I mean, how does it literally work? As in, I can generate a prompt, it will create documentation that can be understood by cursor, and then cursor will write the code for me. Is it something like that, or is it? I mean, how much work I will have to do if I'm using it?
Yes, good question. I think in general, developers don't want to write documentation. So our goal is to get to a point where you're just going to do it for you. So there's two things to it. Number one is you want to generate documentation in the first place, and then you want to validate if that's actually relevant for you. And for that, you have to kind of review it. So our goal is to help you to generate it out of your existing documentation. Is Claude Code, for example, which does that. If you do init with Claude Code, it will generate something like that. Or there's another library called Git ingest, also very good library that like generates an overview of your project. And then the next step is you have to review it and like sprinkle in your personal preferences. And that's where we come in and help you to kind of organize and make your life easier to organize your documentation. And the second one is to generate relevant output for different editors. So you might have a team that use 4 different editors. So we want to produce documentation for each one of those editors that are relevant in your team. And that's how it would work. Yeah.
Yes. So now my question is on the LLM content. So when we ask one question and with our prompt, we got some feedback. But what I would like to know is when we try to keep the feedback loop, so that the LLM can know the context in the history we already have, or does it cannot make sense to the previous context or like that? And how much of the prompt should we keep doing in one history or one conversation?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's a limit, right? The limit depends on the model that you use, and the limit depends on the tool that you use. So let's say you use Cursor. Cursor, you can have a chat. You can open a new chat, but those are also limited to, let's say, if you have a larger code base, to actually maybe just 2 or 3 prompts, okay? And then you might end up with doing a new chat, starting almost from scratch. It will learn over time. It will understand like your preferences as well. They have their own system to understand this over time, but you're still bound to that limit. So that's why I said you have to experiment with your code base, how far you can go. Like, do you describe just a function or do you describe a whole feature? And that will impact the amount that you use in terms of token and output that you're going to get, right? So you have to experiment. There's no golden rule for that. Also, if you use, let's say, Llama, right? They have different sizes that you might try that might produce a different output. So you have to experiment with this. Yeah.
So are there ways to keep the code base compatible with vibe coding? Like, for example, keeping file sizes small?
I would say the way vibe coding works is they have a very strong preference for a stack. If you look at tools like Lovable, or yeah, let's take Lovable as an example. They have a very strong preference for, let's say, using Next.js and Supabase as a combination, just as an example. And if you have a very strong preference, you can produce a very relevant documentation that works 95% of the time compared to, let's say, 50% of the time. If you're more like broader, it's very hard to produce relevant output, right? If you say you can build anything based on any library, this is not going to work, right? So you have to make a decision in your team. What is your preference for tech stack? What versions do you use of a certain library? And point it to exactly that documentation. You will get much better output. So you have to make a decision. You have to agree as a team in terms of like what is the framework that you want to use, and then you will be able to vibe code to a certain extent. Yes.
Any more last question? We might have time for one more. Okay, if not, let's end with Tobias.
Thank you.
Okay.